Glad you could join me. I'm Scott Linden, and this is the Upland Nation podcast. Thanks for being with me, and thanks for sharing this podcast with a friend down the road. Appreciate that. Hey, we got a great show in store for you today. Frank Jezioro joins us. Frank is, of course, a very well-known columnist for Pointing Dog Journal, kind of focusing on the deep woods and grouse, but a few other things in mind. We'll talk birds, dogs, training, and maybe even why a new puppy is always a good idea. So Frank will be with us very soon. We'll also take you to the Upland Nation Glossary in the letter T. I have a public access suggestion for Bob White's in, Texas. Can you believe that? It's all coming up this week on the Upland Nation podcast. A whole bunch to talk about. So let's get right to it. How's your week going? Mine, it's why I moved here. I moved here because I was close to bird hunting and close to some blue ribbon trout streams. Finally getting back into the groove on that stuff. Did a 2-day float of the Deschutes River with a friend of mine, dog training friend, of course, and had a great time. Didn't catch a whole lot, but saw the river in a new way. We floated a stretch I've never floated before, which is kind of cool. This is a river that is in the middle of the freaking desert, but it's a deep canyon, wide canyon, and it is so lush along the banks that it harbors all sorts of wildlife. And the trout fishing can be pretty good too. Some incredible insect hatches and a bit of a whitewater ride once in a while. So we had a good time. The highlight was not catching a big fish. It was drinking coffee, sitting in camp on the morning before we left and watching the other side of the river, maybe a quarter mile away. And they're on the top of the ridgeline, true wilderness, 6 or 8 bighorn sheep. And that's not all. Within a matter of minutes, they were joined by another 6 or 8. And then they started moving from north to south along the ridgeline. And pretty soon you look again and there's 15 or 20. And then they're all bunched up in one green spot, and they're clearly it's breakfast time. And then after breakfast, there are 30, 35 of them, and they just mosey on over in a single file line to about the steepest talus slope we can see from there, and they just lie down and chew their cuds. Have you seen that? It's pretty darn cool. Yeah, okay. So I did some dog training too with Flick. The challenge is it's a fine point, it's a nuance, but it's where I want to be. When Flick retrieves a dead bird, I want him to treat it appropriately, with respect, not gnawing on it, not tenderizing it for me. And that works great when you're working with frozen birds or bumpers of one sort or another. But once the excitement level is amped up and once the birds are dry and thawed, like the real thing, and once he's had a few, he starts to tenderize them as he brings them back. So I'm experimenting. If you got any ideas on that, please let me know. But right now what I'm figuring out is just don't give him the chance. Watch him from way out when he's bringing it back. Correct him if he starts to gnaw. And then when I bring it back, and when he brings it back and he does it the right way, high-value food treats. Yeah, so far so good. Wish me luck. What are you doing these days in that world? Well, it's hot. Yeah, it's going to be 97 today here. And in other places as well, you've got some creative solutions. Jake Takasik says he's getting ready for a NAVHDA test, doing a lot of swimming, planting a few birds to keep his dog's skills sharp prior to that NAVHDA test. David DeSmither is shooting. Yeah, I apologize, Rob. I know you've invited me twice. I haven't been able to make it. We'll get to the range real soon. He's also keeping his dogs in shape up here. That means early in the morning and daydreaming about going hunting. And then, David, good on you, helping a friend train a setter pup. Yeah, a setter. I think that means that's not David's breed of choice. George Cummins running hunt tests. yeah, great way to extend the season. And congratulations, by the way. I've been seeing a lot of ribbons on your Facebook feed, so keep up the good work. Samson, I remember when you were this tall. Good dog. And Lance Larson, like us, way down there. We can't do much when it's 110 degrees out, but we watch Wing Shooting USA together. Well, appreciate that. Good dog, good owner. And speaking of that sort of thing, hey, we're on the air. Yeah, you can now watch Wing Shooting USA via the Outdoor America Network. If you got a Samsung Smart TV, we're on all of those. We're in 110 local stations and 7 regional sports networks. So, as the saying goes, check your local listings for Wing Shooting USA back on the air right now. And I got to tell you, this was a fun project because what I got to do was cherry pick the best 13 episodes. So, check them out. 7 regional sports networks, 110 local stations, 24/7 on Samsung Smart TVs, and all those other services, those streaming services. So poke around in your television. You'll find us there. Appreciate your telling a friend or two as well. And it's all made possible thanks to the generous contributions and support of RuffLand Performance Kennels, Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, and the Ringneck Nation of Huron, South Dakota. I know it sounds crazy to say public access in Texas in the same sentence, but it's true. They got some great programs. It's a little bit hard, but it's not impossible. If you're looking for quail hunting in Texas and you want to access some public ground, one of the best places to go might be the Lake Meredith National Recreation Area. It has less hunting pressure for quail than anything else. Now, be careful out there because if it's deer season, it's a mob scene, but go after or before deer season, and you might have, well, clear sailing when it comes to other people out there. The Corps of Engineers has suggested when you're out there, be careful because they flood and kind of manage that water a lot. So watch out for flooded areas, search for the weedy bottomlands, and head 60 miles north of Amarillo, as they say in the song. It's one place you won't have to lease to find bobwhites. I've been talking about the FurFeathersFriends.com initiative that I've got going. It's a somewhat annual effort to get you to show off your dog with somebody else in the field. Maybe somebody you just met, maybe it's a relative, maybe it's somebody you're trying to get back into the game, whoever it is. Learn more at FurFeathersFriends.com. I just gave away a hunt-ready strap vest to Steven Zirkle. Sign up at FurFeathersFriends.com. You might win the next one. I just got mine, by the way. It's incredible. Take a look at the vest, take a look at the other prizes, and sign up. You'll be emailing me a note that tells me who you're taking this season. And I talk a lot about my pointer shotguns from Legacy Sports. They are a work of art at a price that's a thing of beauty. And speaking of beauty, let's talk about their high-end gun. They call it the Lux, L-U-X. That's how you'd say it, I think, in France. But anyway, it's their high-end field over and under. It's available in 12 and 20 gauge. The usual stuff, but a Turkish grade 2 walnut stock and forend. The wood is beautiful. It's got all the usual stuff, barrel selectors, chrome-lined barrels, 5 chokes, crisp mechanical triggers, and the receiver is embellished with a raised gold finished pair of mallards. Learn more about the Lux, all the Cerakoted finishes, the entry-level, target, and youth guns at legacysports.com/pointer. Well, so glad we finally got connected. You might recognize the byline, Frank Jezioro. He's got a regular column in Pointing Dog Journal, also the author of at least 3 books, the most recent 55 Years a Grouse Hunter. I think it's a few more years now, but we'll ask him about that. He's the former Director of Natural Resources for West Virginia, worked with the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, a lot more in that area. We're going to talk politics. Yeah, my second favorite subject. Plus all that really important stuff. Frank Jezioro, welcome to the Upland Nation podcast.
And thank you for having me, Scott. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners. It's great to talk to anybody that really has a passion for bird hunting, bird dogs, bird guns, just hunting in general. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Hey, what a concept, a podcast about the stuff we like to do. Okay, well, let's do it. But first, a little background on you. You're one of those guys, kind of like me, can't hold a regular job, I think. But you've done some incredible work in the natural resources world, and then also in our, I'll call it more literary world. But what about that background of yours? How'd you end up getting involved with the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources?
Well, it goes back several years. I used to shoot rifle competitively, bench rest rifle shooting, and shot with people from Oregon, matter of fact. It used to come. But during that time, I won 4 national championships and had an opportunity to meet a lot of people. One of them was Warren Page, who used to write, of course, for Field and Stream.
Sure.
And even back then, I'm talking in the early 70s, I expressed my desire to Warren. I said, Warren, I really enjoy writing and talking to people. And, I would like to start writing about the hunting and fishing I've had an opportunity to do, which was sort of limited back then. And he gave me some good advice. He said, Frank, the time to write about hunting, fishing, shooting, guns is when you know more than probably 70% of the people who are going to read it. And I think he was right. What he meant was, until you have the experience that you can talk about these things intelligently and based on your experience, you can back up what you're saying, it's best not to put it out there and find yourself being branded as, someone who really doesn't understand. So from there, I started writing for local newspapers, doing a Sunday article on hunting and fishing and shooting and different things. And that led to writing for one of the Game and Fish magazines, West Virginia Game and Fish. From there, I kept on writing. And after I retired from my real job, now Senator Manchin became governor of West Virginia. And he knew me for several years. He knew my expertise in hunting and fishing and shooting and guns. And so he asked me to become the director of the Division of Natural Resources in West Virginia. So I told him, yes, I would do it. I was retired about a week when he brought this proposal forward. And I told him, I said, Governor, I will certainly do that. I'd like the opportunity, but I'm only going to do it for 4 years. He said, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I wound up working 4 years for him, 6 years for him, actually. Then he became senator. And I worked for the next governor, Governor Tomlin. Anyway, I wound up working 10 years, the longest serving director of the Division of Natural Resources in the history of the agency.
Wow.
But during those times, Scott, we were, especially under Senator Manchin when he was governor, we were able to open up more public shooting ranges. We put sporting clay shooting in the state parks, 2 state parks, when people said, well, you can never do that because you can't have a gun in the state park. But we did that, and they were very successful, very popular. People really enjoy it, and they still enjoy it today. And we were able to purchase a lot of land and open it to the public for hunting. And several things that really pertained and benefited the hunters and the fishermen of the state. During that time, I started writing for Pointing Dog Journal. I think I wrote for them on their original issue, their first issue, when Dave Meisner was a co-founder of Pointing Dog Journal, and then I've been writing for them ever since. But I've been blessed in being able to always have a real job where I could hunt and fish in a lot of different places, and I did. I tell people I've shot everything from garbage dump rats to grizzly bears and Dall sheep in Alaska, but my main passion has always been actually grouse hunting and grouse dogs and raising bird dogs, and I've followed that over the years and continue to do that, and write about it in the various books that you mentioned, and also in the articles for Pointing Dog.
Well, what is it about that whole game, the grouse hunting game in particular, but just working with dogs? What is it that trips your trigger?
I think, and especially this goes to all bird hunting, and everybody has a preference in their sport, their bird, and a lot of it depends on their locality, where they live. If they live, in the high plains country of Montana and that country, they hunt sharptails and huns. But I grew up in an area here where our bird was the rough grouse, and we also, during that period when I started, had outstanding woodcock hunting in the Canaan Valley area. So made so famous by another West Virginian, George Bird Evans, and so that's where I started. And to me, I've had an opportunity to hunt all these birds with pointing dogs. I've hunted quail in the South and out in the Midwest, and I've hunted the pheasants, and I've hunted the huns and the sharptails and prairie chickens. None of them are demanding on a good dog as a rough grouse. Rough grouse has that, I guess he has that uncanny ability to survive. He's hard to handle, much harder than a quail or a woodcock, of course. And he will run, he will run like a pheasant when he wants to. But having a dog and developing a dog that can successfully handle rough grouse day in and day out to me has always been the ultimate challenge. And I've had some good ones, and I've had some that never made it.
Well, yeah, but so have we all. But you hit on something that's intriguing to me, and that is, so how do you develop a dog to handle this bird that used the term cagey? I think, I would say unpredictable. Well, how do you train a dog for that?
Well, you start, and these dogs, if you look back at the history, a lot of these outstanding grouse dogs came from up in New England, where grouse hunting really got its start. Mm-hmm. And those bloodlines were developed, and those dogs were developed hunting rough grouse. And as the grouse became more cagey, as we say, or more hard to handle, so the dogs that were being developed became smarter. So when I'm looking for a dog, and what I've done, I have raised, bred, and judged field trials for, I don't know, back probably now 40 years, 35 years. So I've had an opportunity to see a lot of them. But what I have always done is I start looking for a dog that has some real grouse dog experience in its pedigree. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those, there are certain things that are genetic, that are bred into those dogs, that you can't teach them. We can teach a dog or train a dog to do a lot of things, but to be an outstanding grouse dog, he has to have some brains. And that's what I tell. Well, I tell people, they say, well, Frank, what's the first thing in training a grouse dog? Well, the first thing is you have to know more than the dog. And what I mean by that, you have to know what you want him to do, or what he should do, or what you think, your expectations are for him to be able to do. So you can train a dog to do a lot of things. You can make him staunch. You can make him hunt where you want him to hunt with you. You can do that. Two things you can't do is take a dog that won't get out and hunt and make him get out and hunt. And you can't, I've never been able to, and I don't know if anybody else has ever been able to, teach a dog to work a running grouse.
Yeah.
That's where the intelligence comes in. Some dogs have it and some dogs don't. Some never develop it, and some of them on their own. This genetic inbred track of whatever they have, that's where it comes out. And the more experience they have, the better they get. But you have to start with something genetically attuned. But let me interject this. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dog who was only trained on grouse. One of the best and one of the first that I ever got was a 2-year-old female that came out of southern Illinois that had never seen a grouse, had been trained on quail, and the owner told me, he said, this dog is an outstanding singles quail dog.
Mm-hmm.
I bought her. I lived in Elkins, West Virginia at the time, had access to good hunting in and around the Canaan Valley area. The first day I took the dog out, the first thing, she pointed a grouse. First one she ever saw, and held it. I flushed it, shot it, she retrieved it. We went on 200 or 300 yards. She did the same thing again. The second grouse she ever saw, I shot it, she retrieved it. I picked her up and went back to the truck because I was afraid something would happen to her. I knew that, here was something special.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's that innate thing that you really don't see, Scott, a lot of times. So what I'm saying is good grouse dogs can come from any breed or anywhere, as long as they have good bird dogs in their genetics back, maybe a couple of generations.
Mm-hmm.
We've found over the years, I have found that the grandparents of some of these dogs seem to play an important role in the development.
Well, we joke a lot about blah, 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 skipping a generation. I mean, mm-hmm. You're saying, at least anecdotally, empirically, that may be true.
Well, I've had dogs, the best dogs that I've had until the last dog I have that some people have seen, this dog we call Tiki. The dogs that we've had came from Grouse Ridge Will, the setters, and the pointers came from El Hugh Magoo. And in those dogs, and if you look in the pedigrees of a lot of the good grouse dogs, you find those two dogs or dogs from them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have found that, you might, people say, well, the dog, he might run too big. Well, it's like a racehorse. They breed a racehorse so he will get out and run. And a field trial dog is bred the same way. But he has so many good characteristics that when you move a generation away from that, you may retain those good genetics and those good traits of drive and nose and brains, and you may get away from that desire a little bit to just run out of the country or run like an open all-age, bird dog.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of it is luck, but you have to start with something, that you have confidence in, that there have been some good grouse dogs back in that pedigree. And another thing, I find people say, oh, this breed is the best, breed for a grouse dog, or that breed is the best breed for a grouse dog. And when I hear them say that, to me, it shows me that there may be a little bit of a limit on their experience, because there are and have been and will be good grouse dogs in every breed of dog. It's just getting that individual that comes to the front, and giving that exposure, see.
Got it. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, the host. That's our guest, honored guest, Frank Jezioro. You recognize that name. How can you forget a name like that, by the way? You've seen his byline in Pointing Dog Journal. He's got 3 books out. If you're in politics in the East, you probably recognize that name as well. But we're getting back to the important stuff. You mentioned, a dog handling a running grouse. And, my first thought was, and there are guys, I know short-haired guys in particular, will tell me that their dog handles running pheasants the same way. They figure it out. I've never seen or heard or read anything about training a dog to head those birds off at the pass. You mentioned that it's kind of a natural they learn it themselves. Am I right on that? Is that what you said?
No, I think you're exactly right. I don't know of anybody that can train a dog to go on point and then take that dog and teach him to how close he can actually get before he flushes a grouse, or teach him to push a pheasant to the point where the pheasant will hold in a little bit of cover. That is something that, and that's where the brains part come in. Some figure it out and some don't. A prime example of brains and misbeliefs or whatever. There's a fellow near me here in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, a noted, and a lot of the field trial people know him, and Roy Sisler is a well-known name in training bird dogs. He has a hunting preserve now and still trains some dogs, but he has a world-class shooting preserve. But anyway, Roy was working. He had 4 or 5 dogs that he was working, and he had the owners of the dogs watching. And he turned one dog loose, and it made a beeline for a certain patch of cover and went on point. And he had a bird planted in there, had a pigeon planted in a launching trap. Dog did an excellent job, ran right out there and found it. Well, when they let another guy's dog go, and he hunted around, looked around, finally came over to that certain place and pointed the bird. And the owner of that dog said, well, he said, I can see that the first dog you turned out, he just knew where you plant those birds, and he just went right there to that place and found it. And Roy told him, he said, you're right. Some dogs know how to do it and figure it out and know where the birds are and know what the cover looks like, and some don't. And he was right. Yeah, they can figure it out. They're smarter than what you give them credit for. And if they find a bird in a certain patch of cover or a certain looking patch of cover, a tangle or whatever, the smart ones will go there and look, and the ones that aren't as smart will look all over the country, and before they go to that certain piece of what we would call ideal cover. So there's some things you can teach them, and some that they learn on their own if they have the brains and they pick it up. But you have to have a good prospect to start with.
Yeah,
don't all make it.
I'm reminded of I wish I could remember the whole joke. I'm so bad at these things. Somebody wanted to buy a Labrador. And the guy kept showing him, he would show him a bunch of Labrador puppies doing the same thing. Someday I'll remember it, everybody, I promise you. And when I do, I will tell the joke in the right way. I'll rehearse it. In fact, I'll remember to rehearse it as well. That's Frank Jezioro. I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast. Frank, put your feet up for a moment. I'm going to make a couple commercial announcements, and you will be right back with us after these quick breaks. And don't forget, we also have the Upland Nation Glossary coming up, the letter T. You might be surprised at what I've selected there and maybe learn something. Plus, some of your suggestions on what to do when that other guy's dog is just a little out of control. We're brought to you in part by sageandbreaker.com. Always free shipping at sageandbreaker.com. Sign up for the mailing list. You won't miss the sales like the most recent Father's Day sale. Now's the time to stock up on items that will keep your gun functioning throughout the upcoming season. They're clean, lube, and protect spray, the firearms grease for certain aspects of your gun's action, and the bore cleaning kit, the easiest way to keep your muzzle and all of the rest of your barrel clean in as thorough a manner as you need to. Learn more about what I'm talking about there at sageandbreaker.com. And more dogs ride in a RuffLand kennel than any other performance kennel. They pioneered it. It's no surprise to me. I've had one for years. Learn more about all of their products at rufflandkennels.com, R-U-F-F, rufflandkennels.com. And yes, while they've made some recent improvements to their technology and their manufacturing process, all the new kennels will nest, stack, and couple with the previous versions. I know this because I've put my water topper on my new kennel. I put my Easy Rider top tray on my new kennel. And then they also go right on top, nestled right in there, in my old versions of the RuffLand kennel. Learn more at rufflandkennels.com. And Frank Jezioro probably drives around a lot with dogs in kennels. Frank, welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast.
Yes, sir.
Do you do much traveling these days? Speaking of that sort of thing.
Yes, we the last couple of years we continued. We got started in 1986. The grouse population was down here, and we were looking for places to go. And I had always read about the great quail hunting out in Kansas back during that era. So we started hunting and have been hunting in Kansas for quail, and we hunt mostly in the more the Flint Hills country. I particularly go mostly for the quail out there. Not really interested in getting into a lot of pheasants when I go there. But yeah, we still hunt every year. A friend of mine and I will take 2 weeks at first around the middle of October and go up through the lake states, through Michigan and Wisconsin, and maybe over into Minnesota, and then usually go back again for another week right before their deer season in the first week in November. So we hunt that area for grouse, and we hunt, like I said, Kansas for quail. Haven't been back out to Montana for a while, but hunted out there for a long time in northeast Montana around Plentywood. Very good sharptails. And then North Dakota, every chance we get back out there. There was some great hunting out there for pheasants and for sharptails. So all we can, but mostly I'm still concentrating mostly on the grouse hunting, and then the woodcock are usually incidental to wherever the grouse are, of course. Yeah,
you mentioned that you know your woodcock population has kind of dropped a little bit. Do you have any guesses on that?
Yeah, it's along with the general decline of the woodcock population across the country, the loss of habitat, but there's been a general downtrend, as a lot of your listeners will know who hunt woodcock. But we, several years ago, who was the editor of Pointing Dog Journal, Steve Smith and I, and Jim Hamill, biologist from northern Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, started an organization called Woodcock Limited. And just to put a little more emphasis on woodcock, and then the year or two after that, we saw that the Rough Grouse Society sort of got more involved with woodcock. But it's that general decline. I don't know what's causing it, just range wide. But here in West Virginia, back in the 60s, 70s, we had tremendous flights of woodcock, outstanding woodcock hunting. I mean, it was as good as anywhere you could move 40, 50 birds in an afternoon. The rough grouse have really declined all through the Appalachians. And a lot of that is due to habitat growth. The old timber is growing back up. The habitat has changed quite a bit. And we're suffering a decline. There are still pockets of birds, mostly in our higher elevations. There are some. Everybody has an idea or a reason. Some thought that maybe West Nile has taken disease has taken a toll on the birds. But I think the studies that are being done mostly in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan have sort of dispelled that theory that West Nile is having a devastating impact. Yes, it may be killing a few birds or something, but it doesn't seem to be the overall reason why you might suffer a decline in your grouse population.
Well, you're right. What I hear and read is there's no one answer or one problem to speak of. West Nile is one of those culprits that some folks in the West will talk about. For example, California pheasants.
Right.
We're not seeing any research in that area, but that's, for another podcast down the road. Let's get back to dogs and particularly grouse hunting, because I'm intrigued with how you define a good grouse dog.
Well, I've masked that a lot. A good grouse dog. Let's put it this way: you and your partner, your buddy, you're out hunting, and you're hunting, say, in this country or even up in the lake states, and you're hunting through a big patch of cover. And when you get to the end of it, and you're stopping there talking about it, and you compare notes, and you see that you moved 15 grouse, and out of those 15 grouse, the dog pointed 12 of them, maybe one or two flushed wild, and maybe the other one you have no idea when it went out.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got probably the makings of a good grouse dog. But if you go through that same cover and your dog points 2 or 3 grouse and runs over 4 or 5, and you and your buddy flush as many as the dog did, you don't, in my estimation, you don't have a grouse dog. When you hunt with a good grouse dog, it's very seldom that you actually flush the grouse yourself. Now, you'll flush some, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But if you move 10 grouse, that dog has probably found 8 of them. Yeah. Because he has looked at every spot, every place where a grouse should or may be. I have followed dogs in the snow. We hunt a lot in the snow back here. And I've followed a good grouse dog. And every little bit of cover, as you're hunting along, as you know, as you're walking, you see a little patch over here or there that looks like where there might be a bird, you drift over there and walk beside it. Well, when you're hunting with a dog that really knows what he's doing, every time you get over there in the snow, you'll see that dog's footprints. He's been there.
Mm-hmm.
He's already looked. And if he hasn't, and you go over there 2 or 3 different times and you flush a grouse and that dog's never been around there, then you've got a dog, probably a good dog. If it satisfies you, it's a good dog. But as far as a top-notch grouse dog, no, I don't classify him that. If I'm jumping and moving, flushing as many birds as the dog, then I don't think he's doing his job.
So that's one deliverable, if you will, and, having been in politics and government, you know what I mean by that.
Yes, absolutely.
So what about some of the other things a good grouse dog should do? I get that one, and it's very obvious.
Yeah. Right. Well, the other thing is, of course, the dog should be hunting with you and not, you should be dictating the hunt, where you're going to go. And the dog is checking with you and following and hunting with you and in front of you, out to the side. I don't. To me, it makes no sense for you. You hear people say, "Well, the dog, boy, he should quarter automatically." Well, if there's no cover over on the left or the right, why should he go over there and look? I mean, it makes no sense. Sometimes the cover may be, in one place or one side of the place where you're hunting on one side of the mountain. So just quartering back and forth doesn't make sense. The dog should run to the objectives where there appears that there might be a bird.
Mm-hmm.
So hunting to the cover, hunting for you where you don't have. I've hunted with a couple of dogs that we've had where all day long you may do nothing that whistle one time to let him know you're changing directions, or you might say dead bird fetch. We had a couple of real outstanding pointers at one time that came directly out of El Hugh Magoo. And a fellow asked me, he said, "Oh, how do you grouse hunt with a pointer?" He said, "They run clear out of the country." And obviously, he'd never seen, a lot of pointers. But he said, "How do you handle a dog like that?" And I simply whistled with my mouth. I said, "Can you do that?" He said, "Well, of course." I said, "Well, that's how we handle that dog."
Mm-hmm. And
because the dog was hunting for me and looking and checking on you all the time and not just running in a straight line or running out of hearing. The other thing is, of course, in a grouse dog, it kind of goes like following a running bird. The dog has to be extremely staunch, and he has to have that nose that at the first indication of scent, he freezes. You can't have him tiptoeing up on a bird. You can't, have him getting too close to a bird. And those are things that, you help reinforce when you're teaching him to be staunch. So being staunch, on point until you find him, that's a quality that, we seek in all dogs, but especially in a grouse dog. And then hunting for you, hunting to the gun, of course, but hitting all the likely objectives is extremely important. There's just, and a lot of this goes for any bird dog, but maybe it's just has to be stronger in a grouse dog. He can't just hit scent and then try to tiptoe closer to get a stronger smell. Well, the bird's gone.
Okay, I'm going to be a little selfish, and everybody knows one of my goals with my wire hair is exactly that, and we're getting closer to it in a whole bunch of ways. I'm training using various methods to get him to hit that scent cone and no, you can't road in on that scent cone. It's right there. Stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You have any training advice for those of us who are trying to get that refined?
Yeah. To make the dog, extremely staunch, watch the dog. You can tell when the dog hits that scent cone that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. You'll see him snap around or whatever. Well, at that point, you have to be able to stop the dog, to whoa him.
Yeah.
And if he does whoa, you're way ahead of the game. So when you do get him stopped, you can walk up to him and work him, of course, push him forward. Don't push him out of his tracks, but lift his rear end up so he's doing a handstand on his front legs. Mm-hmm. Twist him a little bit, 45 degrees, and drop him, and he'll stand there. He'll stay on point. Do it, lift him and drop him the other way. And the last resort, when you get him good and staunch, is to gently lift him up, one hand under his chest, one hand under his rear end, and just sort of toss him forward. I'm not talking about lifting him up 3 feet off the ground, but just a few inches, and toss him forward a few inches towards the bird. Now, if the bird flushes, you caution him and you whoa him and tell him, bad dog, and move him back a little bit. That bird holds for him, which it will if you've got a planted bird there, of course. Mm-hmm. He will hit the ground on point. He gets to the place, then you want to stay behind the dog, down on your knees where the dog can't see you, but he knows you're there. If you see him starting to get nervous or maybe you can watch and see if he's starting to take a step. At that time, you tell him, whoa. So he knows you're there, and handle him. Dogs like to be handled when they're on point. They that's part of it. You stroke him from the back, rub the hair the wrong way all the way to his forehead, and that pushing it towards the forward, just like pushing him from behind, easy, and telling him whoa at all times. But let him stand there for 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah. Then get up and flush the bird, so that you're starting to instill in that dog the idea that no matter how long he stands there, you're going to find him and flush the bird.
And you catch him when he's not standing still.
Yes.
I love that idea. We do that around the corner on a lot of walls and fences, for example. Yeah, all those things are great reminders that the all-knowing, all-seeing human will find out at some point. I'm taking distance and using it the same way. I can hide behind any number of head-high sagebrushes out here, and so I'll watch him from a hiding place and do that. Yeah, those are great ideas. And I'd never heard that before. Dog wants to be literally handled when he's on point.
The dogs that are, you'll feel them relax. They enjoy that. It seems to be that they enjoy that handling, that closeness. Now you'll run into the individual that's extremely hyper and nervous, but most of those dogs will never make a satisfactory bird dog of any kind, because if they're extra hyper or extra nervous, they're not really comfortable. But once that dog gets comfortable and knows that what you're doing, that you're handling him and praising him all the time, telling him what a great dog he is, and rubbing that hair forward from his tail to his forehead, and then just steading there behind him where he can't see you, on your knee or something, and you'll even see him kind of turn their head to see if you're there. Mm-hmm. If you notice that little bit of excitement or like he's wanting to take a step and you whoa him again, he knows you're there. Prolong that, and then he'll learn. He'll learn that eventually he can stand there for, 40 minutes or whatever it takes, and that you will eventually flush that bird and let him do whatever it is, retrieve it or stand there or whatever you want him to do.
I'll settle for 4 minutes. That's Frank Jezioro. You know him best as a columnist in Pointing Dog Journal. I'm Scott Linden. Hey, my byline's in there once in a while, too. This is the Upland Nation podcast, and talking bird dogs and birds. And Frank, I just want to get to some more practical stuff. But first, if I recall, you picked up a new dog relatively recently, didn't you?
Yes, I 7 years ago, I bought a male setter off of a friend of mine up in Washington, Pennsylvania, a fellow who has a good bloodline of setters. And I made the mistake, and a lot of people do. I let the line of setters that we had die out because I waited too long to breed them, and so I had to start over. But I knew I had a good prospect. And he turned out, this is a dog we call Ticky, and you've seen him in some of the articles. Mm-hmm. Turned out to be just one of the best that we've had. Just a great grouse dog. So he's 7 years old, and I told my wife, I was 79 in April. So I said, I think I need one more puppy and one more gun. And she looked at me, but being the staunch, agreeable, great wife that I've had all these years, she said, well, go ahead and get one. And so I did. I went back to the same breeder and got a little female puppy that I can breed to this male that's 7 years old if she turns out to make a bird dog. I wouldn't, I just won't breed him unless she shows what we, but anyway, took her up to the Lake States last year, 7 months old. After I got her started here, and she was staunch from the day one. Wow. Because she had those genetics and those characteristics that were from those dogs behind her in her pedigree. Mm-hmm. And she's done everything we expected her to do at 7 months old. She started. Now, she's not a grouse dog. She's pointed several grouse, worked some birds, shows all the characteristics that we're looking for. So I'll know after this year whether she may be the dog that I want to breed to. But again, we started with some proven genetics. Some dogs, I had one out of this line that really made a good dog, this Ticky dog. So we got the little female puppy, Daisy May, and very satisfied. And and I'll go back to something I just said. People ask me when is the right time to start a bird dog. Well, there's a lot of different opinions on that. To me, it's been when the dog lets you know that she's ready to start, or he's ready to start. Mm-hmm. You'll see them start to settle down or start to hunt. You can tell when you take them out, are they just running or are they hunting? And when they're hunting, that's the time to start them. And when you put them on birds the first few times, we start them on pigeons, you'll start to see those characteristics that you're looking for come out. That strong nose, just what we were talking about earlier, that you can see him hit that scent cone from a distance and not have to tiptoe up. So that dog, she's 15 months old now, and this year will give me a good indication if she's going to make it.
Well, good luck on that. I hope it works for you. That'll be great to learn about as well. And speaking of learning, if you had to give us one bit of hunting advice, you've been around the block a few times. What is the thing that you almost always do when you're grouse hunting that we probably don't even think about doing?
Well, it's probably a lot of your listeners do the same thing. There's 2 or 3 things that, as time goes on and hunting pressure, people recognize what grouse cover is or what bird cover is. So what's happening, everybody's hunting the same cover. Yeah. But a lot of people seem to give up. They'll hunt 200 or 300 yards from a two-track road or from something, they won't get back away. But what we have found, we have always seemed to find pockets of birds when we get back away from the road, from where people normally hunt. So a guy told me years ago, he said, Frank, guns don't kill grouse, legs kill grouse. And he had a good point. You have to get out and walk. In years of abundance, yeah, you can get on any two-track road and find birds. But when you walk those same two-track roads that everybody else does, and you're not finding them, get back away from it. Use we have such good instruments today in the little GPSs we carry that you're not concerned as much about getting lost. But get back away. Don't be afraid to get a half mile or a mile from the road. And I've always found that you'll find birds.
That is golden advice, and it's so true, isn't it?
One other thing I'll mention in passing that often happens. You go to a place that you've never hunted before. One instance I can tell you in particular that got me started on this idea. A friend and I were hunting up in Minnesota, and we'd been finding birds all week. There were birds there, grouse, and we saw a piece of cover we hadn't hunted before. It looked just like the cover we'd been hunting, and we'd found birds in, but it was raining. I don't like to hunt in the rain for grouse. I'll hunt woodcock in a slight rain, but it seems like grouse, I learned over the years, and this kind of started me learning what was going on. So anyway, we hunted this particular piece of cover. It was a rainy day, morning, everything was wet. We were wet, so we go back to the car, dry out, try another little place, and we kept thinking about why there were no birds there. It was ideal cover, there was food, there was cover. So about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun came out, it dried things off, and we went back through the exact same cover we had gone through and moved 8 or 10 grouse. And that got me to think, don't try a place that you don't have any experience with on a rainy day, because you may go through there and think there's never a grouse there.
Mm-hmm.
But on those rainy days, those birds seem to hide in the trees or under a log. Okay. They've been sitting there. The dog can pass them, never know they're there. They won't move. And you may be leaving a good piece of hunting country simply because you didn't find any birds. But on a rainy day, you may not find them. And then go back when on a nice day and through the same piece of cover and find birds there. Well, they didn't migrate. They didn't move in and out. They were hiding there somewhere.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, who wants to sit in the rain?
Yes, and when they sit there, Scott, and they don't move around, that scent cone, and just sort of it just doesn't get out there like it does on a sunny, windy, breezy day. Or a damp day, when you have those ideal setting conditions. Yeah. And I'll mention this: people, we hunt a lot in the snow, and so do a lot of your readers. Going out in a day when you've got a dry, powdery snow that just snowed 3 or 4 inches or whatever, you may have terrible dog work. But you go back to that same place when that snow is just starting to melt and has that little bit of moisture in it. And the dogs, for whatever reason, it has to be setting conditions, will have a great day pointing and finding and holding birds. So that powdery snow gives them trouble, but when that snow starts to melt and get that moisture in it, it's great setting conditions.
We could talk all day, and we'll come back and do this again. Frank Jezioro. I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast. Let me leave with this, because I just got my new Hunt Ready vest. I'm loading it with all the gear for this season just to make sure it all is in the right place. But if you were, what is a piece of gear that you take, whether it's training gear, dog care, shooting, hunting, whatever kind of equipment that you take that we may not have thought about taking?
Well, as I mentioned, I carry a little Garmin GPS with me. That because I do want to get back into strange country that I've never been in, and I want to get out. But I also carry a compass.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get out there and push that button on that GPS and find out the battery's died.
Oh man.
So I'll carry a compass. I'll carry that GPS, and then I've got a little kit for the dog.
Yeah.
It has that gel in it that stops bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
Has a little tourniquet in it, and just some things like that to take care of the dog. Other than that, and the shells, that's about all I take with me, like you say, other than your whistle or whatever you may need.
Yeah. I remember a prototype Garmin back in the day when they were first trying to get into the hunting business. Took it out to Winnemucca in the hardest rainstorm I've ever experienced. And back then, they were so new. Nobody thought about how rain can literally stop a satellite signal.
Right.
I walked in circles for a while out there. Yeah, luckily, they figured out a lot since
we did
then.
the same thing. We did the same thing, Scott, when they first came out. Didn't realize that if you were under heavy timber, heavy tree cover, and the leaves were still on, that you better find an open spot somewhere where they could have a shot at the satellite. But they've come a long way. Now they're just indispensable for me. Because of just what we're saying, to get away from the road and get away from everybody where they park, you will be amazed that their birds are back there because they move. If the birds get flushed out of that cover every day, twice a day, for a week, eventually they're going to move. They may move 200 or 300 yards, but they're back there. Mm-hmm. And getting away from those little 2-track roads, if you're not finding them and you think you should be, then just take a reading and get away from it.
Words to the wise from one of the wiser. That's Frank Jezioro. Frank, sure am glad I kept pushing you to be on the Upland Nation podcast. I've enjoyed every minute of this, and I'm confident that everybody else has as well. Hey, if you didn't learn something today, you weren't listening carefully. Frank, a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great season, especially with your new pup, Daisy May. And, just be safe out there and see you down the road.
Same to you, buddy. I'm glad you got a hold of me. I hope the listeners enjoyed it. I hope they learned something, and I sure enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks so much. Take care now.
Bye now.
And we've still got a little bit more here. We're going to cover the Upland Nation Glossary on the letter T. We're also going to get a few of your thoughts on handling someone who brought a dog that maybe isn't as great as yours. Let's just put it that way. Be diplomatic about it. But first, I want to remind you that we are brought to you in part by the Ringneck Nation of Huron, South Dakota. I'll be there. See you in late October. You can be there too. 124,000 acres of public access. More birds than people. Everything from a ringneck festival and bird dog challenge to just some incredible public access. They want to help you. They welcome hunters in Huron, South Dakota. Get a free information pack with maps, discounts, all sorts of other good stuff at hunthuronsd.com. hunthuronsd.com. And maybe you want to take a new gun when you're going to Huron or anywhere else. Did you know midvalleyclays.com is your pipeline to some of the harder to find guns, or maybe, you just can't find the model you want locally? Go to midvalleyclays.com. They got a kind of a special relationship with a lot of the major manufacturers. Dave Fiedler is the operator at midvalleyclays.com, and he's a champion sporting clays shooter and instructor, and so he's got a line on the stuff that you may not be able to find elsewhere. You want to take a look? Reach out to Dave at midvalleyclays.com. All right, in the Upland Nation Glossary, we're at the letter T, and if you have any more suggestions, glad to have them. Just go to one of the Facebook pages, and we will be adding to it as we continue to evolve. The whole list is at findbirdhuntingspots.com. In the letter T, I thought the one that might be fun and maybe less common to those of you who don't train professionally is trash. All right, no, I don't mean that. I don't mean that. I know you pick it all up. But what I mean is the game that you don't want your dog chasing after. In many parts of the country, it's deer. Sometimes it's raccoons. Hopefully it's not skunks. And unfortunately here, it's chipmunks. Trash. The critters you want your dog to stay away from. Thanks for all your suggestions over the years of assembling the Upland Nation Glossary. So I asked at the Facebook pages, someone else's dog is busting birds, running wild, fighting, generally spoiling a beautiful walk in the woods or prairies. So, hey man, how do you handle it? Greg Shea says, happened with a young dog a friend bought. Dog kept coming in on his dog's points. He tried going the other way. His friend was off hunting with another dog, didn't try to rein in this pup, let him run. Finally, I headed for the truck, didn't run a dog when his dog was down for the rest of the trip. And I get it probably in large part because you did have the rest of the trip coming. Understood. Tanya Schmidt says, know who you hunt or walk with. If you don't know the dog and how the owners work, I wouldn't be with them in the field. I get it. Yeah, absolutely. Brad Fleming says he runs 3 female Drottars. He met a lot of out-of-control dogs. If the dog keeps its distance and it's uneventful, I just keep my crew away from them. An aggressive Brit? His Drotts, wow, maintained their downstay as the Brittany raised hell, barking and snarling at his end of the lead. Oh, man. Well, eventually, that Brit learned to fear the beard. You fight one of my Drotts, you fight them all. Okay, well, I understand, and sometimes that might be the solution. Bruce Wondrek has a very diplomatic version. Take my dog, go home, or hunt somewhere else. Now, if they rode out there with you, you got to address the matter tactfully. I understand completely. Yeah, it's a matter of degrees. It always is, and it always will be. Great suggestions, great guest. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Frank Jezioro, for bestowing some of your wisdom from 79 years of playing with dogs and writing books about it. You want to learn more about Frank, just go to any Pointing Dog Journal issue and you'll have some of his wisdom right at hand. If you comment at the social platforms when I ask questions, I sure appreciate that. There's always something to learn, and you teach me every day. Thank you to our sponsors, RuffLand, Kennels, Sage and Breaker, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays, and Ringneck Nation of Huron, South Dakota. You are all great listeners. You are all great contributors. Until I see you again next week here at the podcast, maybe I'll see you on a trout stream. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks for listening to the Upland Nation Podcast.